Australia's median rent has hit a record high of $627 a week. That is up 8.5% on April last year. Okay, time to unpack all the data. We've got CoreLogic's Eliza Owen to join us. Good morning to you, Eliza.
Morning, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, not a surprise here. So many of our viewers message in and tell us what's going on with their rents. But can you talk us through what you're seeing? Because just looking at the median rent really doesn't tell the whole story.
That's right. We're seeing across the cities and particularly the regions at the moment a little bit of a pickup in the pace of rent growth. So that means that not only are rents rising quickly, but they're rising at a bit of a faster pace than what we saw towards the end of last year. It's most pronounced in regional Australia, where we've seen annual rent growth go from about 3.5% in the year to October 23 to about 6.5% in the year to April. But it's also very prevalent in the outer suburban areas of cities, such as Campbelltown in Sydney, Casey North in Melbourne, and Jimboomba in Brisbane. So that suggests that people are having to move further out to secure a rental.
Eliza, we've got some graphics so people can follow it on screen with us. Maybe let's look at the cities first. So when we're looking at Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, they're looking at the increases there. 9.6% in Melbourne, 13.6% in Perth. Just talk us through some of those figures.
Yeah, so the Perth market has seen the highest annual rent increase, but it's also seen the highest uplift in rent values since the onset of the pandemic, with uplifts of almost 60%. Now, for WA more broadly, what we're seeing is a kind of turnaround in migration trends over the past few years. Net interstate migration has turned positive, and net overseas migration is obviously very strong across the country. So that's really skewing to higher levels of rental demand. And again, it's tied to things like employment, an upswing in the mining sector as well. But for locals who have been in certain areas for longer periods of time and are rolling onto leases, 12 months at a time, it can be very disruptive in terms of the shock for the increase in rent prices.
Given that the prices are pretty high as they are anyway, can we bring up what is happening 30 to 40 kilometres outside of those city centres? You mentioned places like Campbelltown and Jimboomba in Brisbane. We're looking at ones there. I mean, Fairfield up almost 15%. Serpentine, 19%.
Yeah, so what you might notice about some of these areas is that while they're not inherently cheap, they are some of the relatively affordable pockets of our cities as well. And that's really a reflection of the current environment that we're in, where cost of living is rising. And so we're seeing more pressure on areas that are historically a little bit cheaper by comparison. And it's basically this rippling of stronger growth rates out to those more peripheral or affordable areas. Now, this becomes a problem because for some rental markets, obviously, there are people who are on a lower wage, they're a little more vulnerable, and for them, there is no next affordable rental market. And that's where I think the rental crisis is most urgent among lower income households, and they're most vulnerable to falling into a more insecure kind of housing.
Eliza, it's so helpful to have a look at all this. Do you have any insight into why things are happening or what might be the next 6 months, 12 months outlook?
So in terms of how we got here, there's a range of short-term factors like fewer people living in each household through the pandemic, obviously the temporary extraordinary spike in net overseas migration that we're going through, where overseas arrivals really skew to rental demand. But the other thing is that this is also coming from decades of successive policy failure, underinvestment in social and affordable housing, declining rates of home ownership, which have put more pressure on the private rental market. And because those are not overnight causes, there's no real overnight solution to what we're seeing in the rental market. I think in the short term, once we start to see a normalisation in overseas migration, that'll help take the pressure off a bit. And we can also look to increase productive capacity in the construction sector. because there's a very high volume of dwellings that are approved or under construction, but they're not complete, they're not ready to live in. So focus on working down that pipeline is really important at the moment as well.
Eliza Owen, always good having a chat to you about this. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.